It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. The kind where sunlight filtered through the curtains, and everything outside moved slowly, almost dreamlike. I had just finished watering the plants on the windowsill, somehow still alive despite my inconsistent care. The house was calm, nearly silent. Only the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the wooden floor broke the stillness. I had just settled into my worn but comfortable reading chair when I heard a knock. It was soft, almost unsure. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a second, I thought it might be a neighbor or someone dropping off a package. But when I opened the door, I saw Michael, my neighbor's son. He looked older than I remembered. He stood there in a faded hoodie and jeans, hair still damp like he'd just come from a shower. He had a notebook tucked under his arm and a familiar shyness in his eyes. Michael had just returned from college for the summer. He'd always been a quiet one, respectful, polite, always calling me, ma'am, even though I'd told him not to. "Hi, Mrs. Parker," he said softly, looking up at me with those brown eyes that somehow looked more mature than before. I smiled and teased gently, "You're 20 now, Michael. You can drop the Mrs." He laughed, a small, nervous chuckle. "Right, sorry, I was wondering if I could ask you something." I stepped aside and let him in. The kitchen still carried the soft scent of lavender and old coffee. "Of course," I said. "Is everything all right?" He paused at the doorway, hesitating just a second like he was unsure if he should really be there. "Yeah, I just didn't want to bother my mom. She's working, and I remembered you used to be a teacher." We sat at the kitchen table, glasses of iced tea between us. He placed the notebook down and looked at it like it held more than just paper, maybe a question he wasn't ready to ask aloud. "I'm taking a summer class, English writing. We're supposed to write something personal, something meaningful. But I don't even know how to start. I keep deleting everything I write." That surprised me. I hadn't seen myself as someone people came to for advice in a long time. These days, I mostly talk to my plants or the grocery store cashier. But something in his voice, uncertain, hopeful, stirred something inside me. A part of me that hadn't felt awake in years. It was one of those slow Sunday afternoons, the kind where sunlight pours softly through the curtains and everything outside feels paused. I had just finished watering the plants by the window, tough little things that had survived despite how often I forgot them. Inside, the house was quiet. Only the low hum of the fridge and the gentle creaks of the old floorboards beneath my bare feet kept me company. I had just settled into my usual reading chair, worn but shaped perfectly to me, when there was a knock at the door. It wasn't loud or rushed, just soft and careful. I wasn't expecting anyone, maybe a neighbor, or someone delivering a package. But when I opened the door, it was Michael, my neighbor's son. He stood there in jeans and a faded hoodie, hair still damp and curling at the sides. A notebook was tucked awkwardly under his arm. He'd recently come back from college for the summer. Michael had always been the quiet type, polite, respectful, always calling me, ma'am, no matter how many times I told him not to. "Hi, Mrs. Parker," he said, looking up at me with shy brown eyes that seemed much older than I remembered. I smiled, trying to help him relax. "You're 20 now, Michael," I teased. "Drop the Mrs." He chuckled softly and nodded. "Right, sorry, I was wondering if I could ask you something." I stepped aside and let him in. The scent of lavender and leftover coffee hung in the kitchen. "Of course, come on in. Everything okay?" He hesitated for a moment before walking in slowly, like he was entering somewhere that meant more than just four walls. He sat at the kitchen table, laying the notebook down and fidgeting with the cover. "I'm taking a summer writing class," he said. "We're supposed to write something personal. Something real, but I keep starting and erasing. I figured maybe you could help. You've lived through more." That caught me off guard. I hadn't thought of myself that way in a long time. I was retired, a widow. My days were quiet. Most of my conversations were with store clerks or my plants. But something about his voice, uncertain and hopeful, stirred something in me. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, needed. Not long after, I was folding laundry when I heard another knock. I already knew who it was. Michael stood there again, hood over his head, raindrops on his sleeves, and shoes muddy from the walk. His backpack sagged, like he was carrying more than just books. He smiled, almost embarrassed. "Sorry, I should have called." I opened the door wider. "It's okay, you're always welcome." He slipped off his shoes, just like before, and looked around like the place was familiar but still made him a little nervous. There was something calming about his presence. Maybe the way he moved, thoughtful and slow. Or maybe his eyes, which scanned the room like he was still figuring something out. I brought something, he said, unzipping his bag. The essay. I wanted to show you. He handed me a folded copy, a little wrinkled like he'd carried it around for days before deciding to share it. I sat on the couch and began to read. It was beautiful, not perfect, but honest. He'd written about our first talk, the tea we shared, how the light fell across the kitchen. He described how that moment felt like time had paused just long enough for something inside him to shift. But what moved me most was how he wrote about being seen. Like, for the first time, someone had really looked at him and noticed he was there. When I looked up, he was watching me, not nervously, just waiting. You have a voice, I said softly, still holding the page. And it matters. He let out a breath, his shoulders dropping like he'd been carrying that tension for years. He sat next to me, not too close, but close enough that I could feel a quiet warmth between us. A candle flickered nearby, filling the air with the soft scent of cinnamon. Outside, the rain tapped lightly on the roof. It was the kind of rain that made everything feel still and safe. I don't know why, he said quietly, but I feel like I can tell you anything. That meant more to me than he probably realized. As you get older, people stop seeing you. You become background, the one who smiles from the porch, who brings pies to gatherings, but no one really talks to. But Michael, he saw me. I gently placed my hand over his wrist. It wasn't romantic or planned. It was just human, a connection between two people who needed to feel real. I'm glad, I said. You're safe here, he nodded, eyes locked on mine just a moment longer than usual. And in that pause, something between us quietly shifted, not in a reckless way, but in a way that neither of us fully understood yet. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind where the light filters gently through the curtains, and the world outside feels like it's moving in slow motion. I had just finished watering the resilient little plants on my windowsill, somehow still alive despite my years of neglect. The house was still, peaceful, only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors reminded me I wasn't completely alone. I had just sunk into my favorite reading chair, worn at the arms, shaped by memory, when I heard it. A knock at the door. Soft, tentative, not urgent, not planned. Just, gentle. I wasn't expecting anyone, maybe a neighbor, maybe a delivery, but when I opened the door, there he stood, Michael, my neighbor's son. He looked older than I remembered. His hoodie damp from the drizzle outside, hair curling slightly at the temples, a notebook clutched under one arm. 19, 20, polite, always, quiet, the kind of boy who still said, "Ma'am," no matter how many times you told him not to. "Hi, Mrs. Parker," he said, brown eyes flickering upward, voice laced with nervousness. "You can drop the Mrs. now, Michael," I smiled. "You're a grown man," he chuckled, just a flicker of one, and nodded. "Right, sorry, I was wondering if I could ask for your help." I stepped aside, already motioning him in. Lavender and coffee lingered faintly in the air. He looked around as if the house had changed while he'd been away at school. We sat in the kitchen, iced tea between us. He set the notebook down like it held secrets. "I'm taking a writing course this summer," he said. "Personal essay, something meaningful, but I keep starting and deleting. I thought, maybe you'd have some perspective." His voice had a kind of rawness that caught me off guard. Most people don't turn to widowed, retired women with forgotten gardens and grocery store conversations for wisdom. But there he was, young, searching, open. And something in me softened. The days passed, and then came another knock, gentle, familiar. Michael again, damp from the rain, sleeves dotted with droplets, a sheepish smile tugging at his face. "Sorry, I should have called." "It's fine," I said, stepping aside again. "You're always welcome." He slipped off his shoes at the door like he'd done it 100 times, and unzipped his backpack. "I brought something," he said. The essay. The paper was wrinkled, folded like he'd carried it with indecision. I read it on the couch. His words were rough, honest. Not perfect, but real. He wrote about our first conversation. The tea, the way I listened, the way time seemed to pause. But what hit me hardest was this. He wrote about being seen. Not as a student, not as someone's kid, but as himself. When I looked up, he was watching me, not nervous. Not proud, just present. "You have a voice," I said softly. "And it matters." He exhaled, deep, like he hadn't breathed in weeks. Then he sat beside me, not too close, but close enough. The air between us warmed, flickered like the cinnamon candle on the side table. I don't know why, he said, but I feel like I can talk to you about anything. And I knew he meant it. There's a certain kind of silence that follows a woman as she grows older. People stop looking at you as someone they can confide in. You become background, safe, polite, convenient. A neighbor, a widow, a ghost. But Michael, he looked. He saw me. I rested my hand over his wrist. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't anything but human. I'm glad you do, I said. You're safe here. He nodded. Slow, thoughtful, and something passed between us. Not inappropriate, not planned, just real, like a current beneath still water. We talked for an hour. Maybe two. About his dad, who hadn't called in months. About how a home can feel like a haunted place. I shared my own emptiness since Gerald passed. The kind of quiet that doesn't soothe, it swallows. You're not like anyone I know, he said. And you're not like anyone I expected, I replied. We sat side by side, not touching, not needing to. Just there, present, breathing. Before he left, he paused at the door. Is it weird that we talk like this? He asked. I shook my head. No, I think it's rare. He smiled, really smiled this time. Can I come by again? Just to hang out, even if I don't need help with anything. Whenever you want, I said. He lingered, like there was something else to say. Then he turned, stepped into the soft mist, and disappeared down the path. I stood at the door long after he'd gone. The scent of rain and melting candle wax still lingered, curling around the edges of the silence like a memory refusing to fade. I couldn't name what was forming between us, not yet. But I knew it wasn't ordinary. And somehow, that was enough. Things didn't change in a sudden, cinematic rush. There was no singular moment. No lightning flash of realization. No sweeping music cue. It was slower than that, softer. Like the seasons shifting, where one day you realize the light hits the window differently. You notice the change, not because it announces itself, but because it no longer needs to. Michael began showing up more often. Not daily, not even predictably, just enough. Enough that his absence made the air feel thinner. There were no calls, no plans. Sometimes he arrived with his notebook. Sometimes with nothing but the weight of whatever was pressing against his chest. I never asked for a reason. I didn't need one. His presence alone was reason enough. One Tuesday evening, I was standing at the stove, stirring a pot roast, Gerald's favorite. The kind of meal that didn't need impressing anyone, just time and patience. It filled the house with that slow-cooked comfort, the kind that made the walls feel like they were leaning in close, listening. When the knock came, I didn't flinch. I already knew. And there he was, Michael. Hands in his pockets, hair tousled from the breeze, cheeks tinged with the faintest pink. His eyes held that same quiet storm I'd come to recognize, the one that said everything he couldn't bring himself to voice. Smells amazing, he said, stepping over the threshold like he belonged there. You didn't interrupt, I replied, smiling. I made too much anyway. Sit down, you're staying. He didn't argue. We moved around each other like we'd done it before, lifetimes ago. Me at the stove, him at the counter, leaning just enough to close the space, but never cross it. He talked about school, about how his mom was working double shifts. About how he didn't know what he was doing with his life. I listened, because that's all he needed. Sometimes I offered words. Most times, I didn't. It wasn't about advice. It was about presence. It was about being seen, not in the bright, scrutinizing way, but in the soft, forgiving light of someone who chooses to stay. Someone who chooses to understand. I didn't move away. I didn't need to. The contact wasn't bold or intentional. It was a quiet reaching, the kind that happens when two people are trying not to feel alone at the same time. The kind of touch that doesn't ask permission because it isn't asking for anything. It's simply there, present. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding that breath for far too long. I'm not really close to anyone back home, he admitted. Not like this. Not with anyone. I nodded, my fingers curled around the ceramic of my mug, grateful for the warmth it offered. Sometimes connection finds us where we least expect it. And it doesn't always follow the rules. He turned toward me slightly, his shoulder brushing mine. Do you ever feel like you missed something? Like life gave you a version that wasn't quite yours? I stared into my tea, watching the steam twist in the candlelight. Every day. But sometimes I think we're not really missing things. Sometimes we're just waiting for the part we didn't know we needed. Silence followed again, but not the awkward kind. It wrapped around us like a blanket, weightless and comforting. His hand rested on the cushion between us, fingers open. Not reaching, just resting. I didn't think. I simply let my pinky graze his. Barely there, a whisper of a touch. But we both felt it. He didn't move, neither did I. The rain outside began again, gentler this time. Softer. It filled the space around us, a lullaby for the quiet-hearted. Sometimes he arrived with stories, thoughts that tumbled out like loose thread in need of weaving. Other times, he brought only silence. And both were welcome. One Friday afternoon, while I was trimming the hedges along the backyard fence, I heard the now familiar crunch of shoes on gravel. I didn't turn right away. I already knew who it was. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me, he said, stopping just past the gate. I set down the shears and wiped my hands on the apron. Of course I do, I said. Come in. We sat on the porch together, where the late afternoon sun slanted low through the oak trees, casting long amber shadows across the yard. The heat of the day had finally softened, and a breeze swept through, cool and edged with the soft scent of blooming jasmine. He seemed different that day. He seemed calmer that day, or maybe more certain. Not in any dramatic or bold way, but in the subtle way he looked at me, as though he'd decided to stop tiptoeing around whatever it was that lived between us. I've been thinking, he said quietly, about the other night. About us. I wrapped my hands around a glass of water, the condensation cooling my palms as it slowly trailed down. You don't have to explain anything, I said, my voice even. But I want to, he replied quickly. I don't want this to feel like something we avoid talking about. He looked down at his hands, calloused in places, ink-stained in others. I feel more like myself when I'm here than I do anywhere else. You don't push. You don't try to fix me. You just, let me be. My heart ached, not from pain, but from a kind of recognition. That kind of belonging was rare. Especially in the in-between spaces life sometimes left us in. You're not a kid, Michael, I said softly. And you're not just the neighbor who used to help me with my garden or fix the gutters. He looked up then, and for once, his eyes, so often unsure, held steady. I see you, he said, and I care about you. A lot. The words landed gently, but with weight. They were soft, yes, but undeniably bold in their honesty. I hadn't expected them, not like that. But they were clear, unmistakable. I took a breath, slow and grounding. This connection we have, it's real, I said. But it's delicate, it's complicated. The world wouldn't understand it. I don't care what the world thinks, he said, not with defiance but conviction. All I know is, when I'm with you, I feel calm. I feel like I belong somewhere. We fell into silence again. Not awkward, just quiet. Thoughtful, grounded. I reached for his hand. Not urgently, not out of possession, but with something deeper, respect, recognition, reverence. I care about you too, I said. But what matters most to me is that you keep growing, that you become who you're meant to be. He nodded slowly, his thumb brushing lightly across mine. I think I already am, he said. That evening, we didn't cross any lines. There was no need. We just sat together as the sky turned from gold to deep plum, listening to the breeze thread its way through the trees and the quiet rustle of the leaves. We talked about his writing, about how he wanted to pursue it seriously but didn't quite know how to begin. He admitted he was scared to tell his mother about it, about my travels too, the stories of the places I had gone with Gerald, and the ones I still dreamed of visiting even now. I told him about the time I got lost in Santa Fe, how my phone had died and I ended up spending the night on a stranger's porch when no one answered the door. He laughed then, really laughed, the kind of deep, full-bellied laugh that didn't come from him often, and hearing it made me feel younger somehow, like laughter could stretch time. At one point, he leaned his head back against the chair and looked up at the stars, just beginning to scatter across the sky. You ever think, he asked quietly, that people come into your life at the exact moment they're supposed to? I looked at him then, this boy who wasn't quite a boy anymore, and nodded. All the time, I said. When it was time to go, he stood slowly, like the evening had made him heavy with thought. I'll be back, he said. It wasn't a question, it was a truth. I know, I replied. He walked down the garden path and turned once at the edge of the dusk to offer me a quiet smile. Then he disappeared into the deepening blue. I stayed there on the porch as the last light faded, surrounded by the hum of cicadas and the warmth of memory. The candle on the table had burned low, reduced to a stub of wax and the lingering scent of cinnamon in the air. I didn't know what we were, not exactly. I didn't need to, because whatever name it might carry, this thing between us was real. Not dramatic, not scandalous, just human. A quiet, steady reminder that even after all these years, even after decades of living, new chapters could still unfold. A week passed before I saw him again, not because anything had changed between us, but simply because life moves in its quiet circles. I filled my days with small, ordinary rituals, watering the begonias, folding linens with more care than necessary, even rearranging the spice drawer as if it mattered. But underneath it all, my mind drifted back to that last evening. To the way his fingers had laced with mine, to the softness in his voice when he said my name. It hadn't been about the touch. It hadn't even been about the words. It was about feeling alive again. On a Sunday morning, as I cut lavender from the garden, I heard footsteps on the gravel path. I didn't have to look up. I already knew it was him. He was opening the gate, holding up a paper bag with grease spots blooming at the bottom. I brought cookies, he said. They might be terrible. I smiled. They'll be perfect. We sat on the back porch, the sun still climbing in the sky, low enough to stretch our shadows long across the wooden deck. The morning was cool and painted in soft orange and blue-gray, the kind of sky that promised gentle weather. Michael didn't say much at first, and neither did I. Some mornings aren't meant for conversation. They're meant simply for being. After a while, he broke the silence. I've been thinking about internships, he said, cracking a cookie in half and handing me the bigger piece. Local newspaper. It's not a big deal, but it feels right. I looked at him and nodded. That's more than enough. Feeling right matters more than looking impressive. He chewed thoughtfully, like the idea needed time to settle. Then, quieter, more careful, he added, I don't know what this is between us, but I know it's not nothing. My throat tightened, not from sorrow, but from the weight of something honest finally being spoken out loud. No, I said gently. It's not nothing. He turned toward me, resting his elbows on his knees, hands clasped, eyes steady. I don't need it to be anything defined. I don't need it to have a name, he said, his voice steady but low, but I need you to know that, being seen by you has changed me. I didn't respond right away. I let the breeze answer for me instead, rustling through the trees, brushing against our arms like some quiet, invisible presence resting gently between us. I've spent so much of my life being useful, I finally said, my voice barely more than a breath. Being the one people come to for favors, for comfort, for holiday pies and casserole recipes. But you looked at me and saw more. He was quiet, listening, eyes locked on mine. You reminded me I wasn't done yet. He swallowed, voice thick. You were never done. I smiled softly, blinking slow, trying to keep the emotion from spilling over. Maybe not, but I'd forgotten that. He reached out then, fingertips brushing mine, not out of desperation or desire, but like someone reaching across a distance that no longer needed to exist. A quiet gesture to say, we made it here. I want to keep seeing you, he said. Even if it's just on Sundays. Even if we never call it anything. You're always welcome, I replied. We lingered a while longer. We talked about the novel he'd just finished, about his mother's promotion at work, and a hawk that had nested in the pine tree near the back fence. The conversation flowed gently, like a river in no rush to reach its end. Eventually, he stood. I should go, he said, though he didn't take a step. I know, I murmured, not moving either. He looked at me, and for a moment, everything stilled. The light, the air, even the space between us. Something about that moment held itself there, like a breath, caught just before a sigh. See you soon, he said. And I believed him, not because we made promises, not because we mapped out what came next, but because sometimes, two people don't need to. Sometimes, what exists between them is enough. A presence, a silence that speaks louder than any confession. A connection that doesn't ask to be named to be real. Maybe that's what we all want, deep down, to be seen, to be understood, to be allowed to simply exist in the presence of someone who won't ask us to be more or less than who we are. Michael gave me that, and I gave it back to him. A quiet flame, not a wildfire that devours everything in its path, not a fleeting spark that dies in the wind, but something steadier. Something that lasts. A warmth that says, I'm here. I see you, and you matter. If this story made you pause, even for just a moment, if you saw yourself in Karen, or in Michael, know this, you're not alone. Leave a comment below. Share a moment when someone truly saw you, or someone you hope might, one day. And if you ever find yourself standing at a door, uncertain whether to knock, remember, sometimes, everything changes with just that one knock. Life doesn't always unfold in ways that make sense to others. Sometimes, what begins in silence becomes the loudest truth in our hearts. This story wasn't about betrayal. It was about rediscovery, about finding connection in the most unexpected places, and about learning that being seen, truly seen, is one of the rarest gifts of all. Let this serve as a reminder that love doesn't always wear the labels we're taught to look for. Sometimes, it just exists, quiet, sacred, and undeniable. Thank you to every reader who took the time to walk through this story with an open mind and heart. Your presence, your reflections, and your willingness to feel deeply are what keep stories like this alive. If this narrative touched you, made you think, or made you feel less alone, thank you for being part of that moment. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created for emotional and reflective purposes. While it touches on sensitive themes such as emotional connection, age gaps, and infidelity, it is not intended to promote or encourage inappropriate relationships, betrayal, or moral transgression. All characters, events, and scenarios are fictional, and any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Viewer discretion is advised, especially for those who may find the subject matter triggering or uncomfortable. The goal is to explore the complexities of human emotion, connection, and personal growth.